All right, we are back in the book of Ruth. This is the third lesson. So far, we've been following this family from Moab back to Bethlehem. Things have gotten really dark. The last we left, Ruth and Naomi, they had just made it into Bethlehem. People were surrounding them. There was the murmurs, the talk. Naomi's back. She's got the Gentile woman with her, Ruth. And then we begin to see at the end of the story a little bit of hope, because now it's harvest season. So things are about to happen. They're about to eat. Naomi, we ended her feeling bitter. She was feeling resentment because all the things that she had been through. And she began to not only place blame to God, saying his hand is went against me, but she also acknowledged his sovereignty in her situation, even though it did look bleak and bad for her. So now we're out of the portion of orchestration in the dark, because it's still going on. But now we're in the book of Ruth, the kingdom in sight. This one is called Providence While Harvesting Hope. We're in chapter 2. We're going to try to complete chapter 2 today, and we're just going to walk through as we usually do and just kind of glean from the nuggets that are there. So these are the things to remember. Laws of harvest, the poor and the stranger. You'll find this in Leviticus 19, 9 through 10, and 23, 22, and Deuteronomy also 24 through 19. This states that the poor and the stranger mandate that when harvesting crops, farmers should not reap to the very edge of their fields or gather all the gleanings, leaving some behind for the poor and foreigners to collect, essentially providing them with means to gather food for themselves. This practice demonstrates a responsibility to care for those less fortunate, including foreigners who may not have access to land or resources. Another thing to remember is the laws of levirate marriage. You'll find this in Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10. This states that a widow to marry her deceased husband's brother if he died without a son. The law was intended to ensure the widow's support, to keep the deceased man's name alive, and to maintain the family's inheritance. If the brother refused, the elders would summon him to marry. Further refusal resulted in public shaming. If the deceased man had no brother, the widow would marry his nearest male relatives, such as a cousin or an uncle. So these are set in place in order to help the less fortunate, and also to help those that are part of the family that may be left out of the inheritance. So there was still a way, there was still hope there. And these laws are going to come into play as we go a little further in. Some words I want to look at, and when we get to them, we'll kind of highlight them. So the first one I want to look at is lakat. Let me get my pronunciation. Yeah, lakat. That means to glean, to pick up, gather, glean, gather. And then we have mikra. That means just happened, unforeseen, meeting or event, accident, happening, chance, fortune. And then we have nakri, the foreigner, stranger, foreign, alien, stranger, foreign, woman, harlot. And then we have gael. This means close relative, kinsman to redeem, act as a kinsman redeemer, avenge, revenge, ransom, do the part of a kinsman, to act as a kinsman, do the part of the next of kin, act as a kinsman redeemer. And that's going to tie into that levirate marriage. The kinsman also was able to redeem those who were sold into slavery, and those who were in desperate need of help. So if they had a relative that was able to do that, that's where this knight, this hero would step in. So automatically, just in verse 1, we're going to look at, that's where we meet our kinsman redeemer, our hero of the story. We're going to get a glimpse of him here, and then we're going to go right on through. So in chapter 2, verse 1, there was a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. So Boaz in Hebrew means in him is strength or swiftness. From the tribe of Judah, a Bethlehemite, he was the closest relative to a deceased Elimelech, possibly a brother, if not, certainly within the tribe or clan. He was an ancestor of David, a kinsman redeemer to Ruth, daughter-in-law of Naomi. So we automatically see that there's going to be a little bit of hope here. They already introduced the redeemer. And so with that, real quick, just to prime our minds with the law, and then we'll talk a little bit about this. We did talk about this just in that first slide of things to remember, but I want to really get into it and read the actual scripture. So in Leviticus 19, 9 through 10, this is the law, the duty of morality to the foreigner and less fortunate. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And you shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 24:19, when you reap the harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. The Lord your God may bless you in all your work of your hands. So as they were gathering, and they would tie the sheaves together so it'd be easier to carry, if they left one behind, they couldn't go back and pick it up. And this again was for the less fortunate. For those who may have came into the land and are trying to survive, they would go into the fields and begin to pick up what's left over. If you drop something, leave it behind for the poor, less fortunate, or for the foreigner. This was also a way just for the poor to have dignity. So this was a wonderful way of helping the poor. It commanded the farmers to have a generous heart, and it commanded the poor to be active and work for their food. It was a way for them to provide for their own needs, again, with dignity. That way they weren't just kind of sitting around and waiting and being lazy about it. This actually helped them to go and provide for their family and then possibly find other work and in interaction with other people that were working the fields. So here we go. God's providence. We're going to read Ruth 2 through 17 and again just walk through each portion. So Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him in whose sight I may find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Then she left and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered him, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" So the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered and said, "It is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. And she said, 'Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves.' So she came and has continued from morning until now, though she had rested a little in the house." Then Boaz said to Ruth, "You will listen to me, my daughter, will you not? Do not go to glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close by my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessel and drink from what the young men have drawn?" So she fell on her face, bowed down to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" And Boaz answered and said to her, "It has been fully reported to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth, and have come to the people whom you did not know before. The Lord repay your work, and full reward be given to you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Then she said, "Let me find favor in your sight, my Lord. For you have comforted me and have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants." Now Boaz said to her at mealtime, "Come here and eat bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar." So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed parched grain to her, and she ate and was satisfied and kept some back. And when she rose up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, "Let her glean among the sheaves and do not reproach her. Also let grain fall from the bundles, fall purposely for her. Leave it that she may glean and do not rebuke her." So she gleaned in the field until evening and beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. Amen. All right, so a lot to kind of unpack, and we're going to walk through it. So just in verses 2 to 3 that we just read, Ruth, possibly knowing the law due to Naomi's, takes the initiative to provide for their survival. And you could see already Ruth's character and her devotion to Naomi. As soon as they got kind of settled in, and maybe possibly knowing Leviticus 19, saying, "Hey, let me go out into the fields. Let me go gather some food so we can eat, so we can survive." And so she quickly goes out, and Ruth's love for Naomi led her to the right place, not by coincidence, because we've seen that by happen, in the Greek when you read it, it says by hap. But that word there is going to be mikra. That's going to be the word we look at that's coincidence. But again, we know that's not a coincidence. That's just the author's way of telling us that God's hand is moving in this situation. It wasn't just by coincidence she happened to be in Boaz's field. This again was God's providence. God's providence is seen through the Mosaic law that was set into place several hundred years before the time of Judges. So it's almost like God knew this situation was going to happen, so he set this law in place so she can truly benefit off of this. So she goes into the field, they settle down, she's walking through, and she starts to glean, and then Boaz's godly character shines through his words and treatment of his servants. Again, he walks up on the scene, and he says, may the Lord bless you. And they say the same thing, may God bless you. A man's character is seen by the way he treats his staff and the way they interact with him. So he had a really great relationship with his staff, with his servants. And again, we see that shine through by the way he treats them and the way they talk. God's always on his heart and mind and his lips. So Boaz takes notice of Ruth and inquires about her. So he gets on the scene and he notices, who is that? It doesn't say anything about her looks, if she's pretty or anything like that. I would assume she is, but that's not what he's noticing. Maybe he knows his staff so well and he knows how many female maidservants he has, he notices a different one. Or maybe she's working a little harder. And that's what he sees. That's what he notices about her. Not just her beauty, because if she's working all day, she may look a little ragged, sweaty, and just out in the fields. There was no makeup. She couldn't get her nails done or lashes done. I mean, she was out there in the fields working. And he took notice of that character, that work ethic that she had. And Ruth's character begins to shine through also being humble, hardworking, loyal, and diligent to care for Naomi morning till evening. And we see that verse 7 and 17, that she's in the fields all day working. And it says that the supervisor or the main servant of Boaz, when he asked, who's that? He's telling her, yeah, she was working all day. She got here this morning and she went into a little house just to rest. That little house is going to be something that they make in the fields out of the sheaves or the leaves and things to gather just to make shade. So she would work all day, go to kind of where they were gathering, kind of, I guess, like in the workplace when you have the water cooler. You're going, you get your little water and you're sitting there hanging out. Hey, how's it going? Talking. That's what they're doing here in that little house, in that little hut. They're going, meeting, and then she goes right back to work. And then in verses 8 through 13, Boaz provides Ruth protection and provision, knowing about her history. He automatically asks, who is that? And when he hears that that's Naomi's daughter-in-law, he may have like, oh, wait, I know this. I know this story. I've heard about him, so that's her. And so he automatically starts to make provisions, possibly because Naomi is related to Elimelech, or married to Elimelech, and that's his relative. And so his heart goes out to Ruth because of what she's doing, and he begins to provide protection for her, making sure that, hey, you guys don't touch her, don't harass her, don't flirt with her, just leave her alone. She's trying to make a living, and she's trying to survive. Let her be. So this man steps in and begins to take initiative and charge over the situation for the care of Ruth and Naomi. Now, Ruth couldn't understand the grace shown to her and was humbled, and Boaz blesses Ruth, and she commits her loyalty. Again, whenever he comes to her and blesses her, making sure that she has all that she needs, he provides a little extra. And then she commits her loyalty, and she can't forget that she's a foreigner. I mean, she knows that she's from Moab. And so she's kind of taken back at the love and the kindness that Boaz is showing her because of this. Not only that, remember the Moabites weren't allowed to enter the house of worship. But with Boaz, his grace, his love, him, and we see how he's going to go beyond the letter of the law. He shows so much grace that he begins to provide for her on his own, the protection and the provisions. And we can see God's providence through Boaz's grace to the foreigner. And we got to make sure we are doing the same thing, not only to a foreigner, but to a stranger, a less fortunate person, or someone outside of the covenant. Just because we're in church and we're in a covenant, we can't treat someone else who don't know Christ like, oh, well, you don't know none of this and you can't have any of this, or treat them less because they don't know Christ. Because we were in that same position at one point, and it was by someone's love and grace and patience that we were able to have that same provisions Boaz is making for her. When we went into the church, he was like, hey, don't worry about this. This is a safe place here. I got you. If you need to talk, we can go back to the office. We can do whatever it is that that's how the church works. And this is how we see this kind of playing out for Ruth. She's feeling comfortable. She's found a safe place with Boaz, and he has taken a liking to her, not only because he's a relative, but maybe there's some sparks starting to fly that we're going to see. In verses 14 through 18, Boaz makes further provisions for Ruth and shows further grace by granting her request to glean among the sheaves, going beyond the letter of the law. So that means he knows the law, like, hey, if anything falls, let her get it. But he goes beyond the letter of law saying, hey, let her get the sheaves too. The things that you've already wrapped up and that you're going to transport, let those go too. Let her take that to Ruth, because I know Naomi. She's an elder. She can't get out here, and she's doing what she can to survive. So since she's related, let's show her some grace. Let's show her some love and leave some stuff behind. We got to do the same thing with our brothers, our sisters, the foreigner, the stranger. We live in the land of plenty. And you can go to any corner and you can see a trash can and food in that trash can, a bite taken out of it or half a plate. And that's crazy. I work at a place where they throw tons of food away. They'll donate some, but they throw tons of food away. He's making provisions for her to make sure that everyone's taken care of. There's going to be no trash. Nothing's left behind. Make sure that everyone gets fed. And that's how it is, again, it should be in the church, that when we get into the Word, we have to make sure that everyone's getting fed. That's why one thing I like about our congregation is the question comment portion. Because although we're here and we're going through the Word, there may be some things that I don't quite understand that. And so we kind of go back at the end and we make sure everybody gets fed. What did you not understand? What do you have a question about? This is God's grace. This is being shown and shined through Boaz. And so further on, Ruth worked diligently and brought back 30 to 40 pounds of barley, leftovers from a meal with Boaz. So I want to look at that. That's where the whole corn nut thing is going to come in now. As I was reading through, I was like, what is parched grain and why are they dipping their bread in vinegar? Because vinegar is to me, is just not tasty. And so I was kind of looking this stuff up. The word there that they use for that sour vinegar is chometz. It's vinegar. It's a common condiment mixed with sour wine, a little oil used to quench or relieve thirst. So they're there, it's lunchtime, and the workers are doing their thing. I don't know if it may be like this at your workplace. I know it's like this at my workplace. When it's time for lunch, all of us hourlies, we go to the break room and we eat our lunch, and the supervisors, the managers, they'll go into the office and they'll get canes in and out, all this stuff, while we're up there just kind of in the vending machine area getting what we can. It's been a separation. Here it's like that too. But Boaz sees Ruth and says, hey, you come over here and eat with us. We got the parched grain, we got the sour mixed wine. And parched grain is just that. It's corn or grain that's been roasted over a fire. And it's supposed to help quench your thirst, relieve the thirst. So she's eating and he's like, hey, dip in some of this vinegar. The vinegar, again, vinegar often starts with wine or beer. I had to do a little study because I wanted to know how this works. So vinegar often starts with wine or beer that has already been fermented. As this simply speeds up the process, it is also common to make vinegar from fruit. The ferment passes through an alcoholic stage, and then the alcohol is metabolized into acetic acid, making vinegar. We read this a little bit in the Old Testament and the New Testament, actually. So wine and vinegar is mentioned in the Old Testament as a quenching drink. We read that in Numbers 6:13 and Ruth 2:14. In Greek and Roman literature, it was commonly known to be effectively relieving thirst among laborers and soldiers. So you would get the vinegar and mix a little bit of oil with it, and then you would dip your bread into it. Jesus was offered wine on the cross twice. The first wine mixed with myrrh was designed to dull the senses. That's the one he refused at first when they tried to give him that vinegar with myrrh. The second sour wine was given to keep him conscious for as long as possible. That's that quenching thirst there. That's what he did drink. And he was on the cross conscious because they kept him hydrated and alive so they can extend his torture and his death. And so that's a little bit of history with that. They're sitting in the mill, having lunch, and possibly that's where the romance probably started. They're eating together, they're talking, they're breaking bread, having wine, the wine vinegar, and dipping in and getting to know each other, maybe just kind of laughing and talking. But the fellowship is definitely there. So now we see that things are coming together. And Ruth never really complained at all when I look at this. We see Naomi complaining or talking about how she's bitter and how God's against her. Ruth is like, gratitude. Thank you, that I found favor in your eye. I'm a foreigner and I don't even belong here, but you're accepting me like I'm one of you. And that's, again, something a characteristic that we as a church should have for those outside of the covenant or those who are trying to fit into a church, that we love on them, we show them provision, and we kind of just take them in. And not only that, I like the prayer that he prays over Ruth. Just the imagery of a bird having her younglings under her wings, kind of nestled and keeping them safe, that's where he's saying, he's like, you've found refuge under the wings of the Lord. And he knows that she left her people behind. And that's another thing we need to do as a church to new converts. When we see them, we have to encourage them. We have to love on them. We have to take notice that, hey, we know what you left behind. We know that it's a struggle to make that transition from the old self and transform into Christ and a Christ likeness. And so when we come to meet a new convert or someone in the church, we have to make sure that we are uplifting, that we're loving and encouraging them in the Lord. Not like, oh man, you've been walking this long and you don't know scripture, you ain't read the whole Bible yet, you don't know this or you don't know that, and where's your theology at? And do you know that's not what this is about. This is about having a relationship with Jesus. That can come later, deeper you go. But as a church, we are supposed to love our fellow human beings, uplift them and encourage them. And that's what Boaz is doing. He knows that she's related to Naomi. And so he begins to love on her, show her encouragement. Verses 19 through 20. So we're going to read the last of this and wrap it up. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where have you gleaned today? And where did you work? Blessed be the one who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he, the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead. And Naomi said to her, This is a man, is a relation of ours, one of our closest relatives. Then Ruth the Moabitess said, He also said to me, You shall stay close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that you go out with these young women, and that the people do not meet you in another field. So she stayed close by the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of the barley harvest and wheat harvest, and she dwelt with her mother-in-law. Amen. And now, Naomi, again, at the house waiting. She's probably wondering, I wonder how Ruth is doing out there. She's gleaning in the fields on her own. She's taken on this whole new lifestyle as a covenant person. And she's going and taking initiative to go do the work. And here, Naomi's delighted for Ruth's gleanings, and she's amazed to learn that it's from Boaz's field. So you can almost imagine that she's like, where did you get all this? So, where were you? And then when she mentions Boaz's name, something clicks. She's like, oh my gosh. No, that's impossible. Boaz? And she's like, yeah, he told me to stay close by. And then she reveals to her who he is. So immediately Naomi recognizes the Lord's sovereign hand at work, his covenant, loyalty, loving kindness, and mercy due to Ruth finding their closest relative without being directed from human effort. So automatically now Ruth is having a change, Naomi's having a change of heart. Because remember, she was like, well, I'm bitter. Don't call me Naomi no more. Call me Mara. I'm bitter. I'm not the same person. My identity died when my husband and kids died. I'm no longer mom. I'm no longer wife. Call me bitter. This is who I am now. Now things are starting to take a turn. And now she's praising God again. And now she's seeing things and she's connecting the dots. And this is bringing more hope to her. And then Naomi reveals that Boaz is a close relative and advises Ruth to do as directed and stay close to Boaz's harvesters and his fields. When she says that he's a close relative, that's that word Gael. He's that kinsman redeemer. So now she hears the name, she's starting to connect the dots like, wait, there's something going on here. There's hope here. And you didn't, by chance, you didn't mikra into the field. You didn't just coincidentally go into that field. She knows that there was direction from God and she acknowledges that. So God's process in the dark brought hope to Naomi and Ruth in the form of a redeemer. They didn't know that this was going to happen. They were just trying to make a living. They were just trying to get by the scraps they can get. And then Boaz enters the picture and brings hope through his grace, through his love that he's showing to Ruth. A lot of times too, as I was kind of playing this out in my head this morning, you know, Ruth took the initiative. She could have said, hey, we're gonna stay here and pray today. We're gonna fast and pray and hope that God provides. If you're in Christ, if you're a new convert, if you want to experience God, a lot of times you got to take the initiative. You got to take the first step. If you're in a situation to where, let's say you need employment and you're praying to God for employment and you're not looking for the one ads or going job hunting, that kind of doesn't make sense to me, because God is going to bless your efforts as you seek him out. That's what they are doing here. Ruth probably didn't even understand what was going on. She was just acting in obedience, and God blessed that obedience. And not only that, the obedience, that blessing was so much it trickled down to Naomi, her mother-in-law, because now she's hearing Boaz, and now she's connecting dots and thinking, okay, God's up to something. God, now I have my hope back. Now I'm getting filled back up with this joy. Now I see that there's possibly something here. And so in verse 23, Ruth stayed committed to Boaz. I don't know what that said. Boaz's request, and remained close to his fields amongst the young women until the end of the harvest. And so that's 2 months. So God blesses Ruth's faithfulness through the harvest as his sovereign hand continues to orchestrate his plan of redemption. And so we'll kind of bring this to an end. I love this story. I do. I went for my walk this morning, and I was just thinking about how all this plays out and how faith plays a big part in this situation, but it also plays a big part, fast forward to us in our Christian walk. Because of things that were made, the decisions that were made back then, we are blessed by it. Decisions you're making now are going to bless someone else. You just don't know it yet. We were blessed through the situation because King David came through that. And then King David, Solomon, and through the whole line, we got Christ. And now we're here talking about this story, about his relatives. And now that we're a part of this spiritual family. And so a lot of times, the things that you're doing, it doesn't make sense. You can plan and you can hope and you can pray and you can wish for things to work out, and you're making your own way and it fails. But if you just stay obedient to God and walk in faith and take that initiative, he's going to bless it. And I was thinking today, you know, we only see God's grace in his hand in a situation through our obedience when we look back at it. Then you can see like, oh man, God was all in that. When you're going through it, you're like, I don't know. Oh, you say to do this, God, I'm going to do it. But, you know, whatever. And you're taking those steps. You don't see God at that moment. You don't see how he's going to do these things. And then when you look back at it and you've walked in obedience, you're taking these steps of faith, and the thing you prayed for happens. And then you look back in time and you're like, oh, that's why that happened. That's why that accident, or that's, you know, it's not an accident. There's no coincidence. In this Bible, in any Bible, the word you are not going to find is oops. God, it's not going to be there. God doesn't make mistakes. You're not going to find that in this Bible. There's no surprises to God. Everything is planned out. Even when you feel like it's not planned out and things are going rough, just like we see here, God is still active in your life. You just don't see it right now because he's still trying to put the parts together. But if you walk obediently in faith, and when you're done completing whatever task that he has for you, and you've established the blessing or whatever you're praying for, when you look back at your story, then you could see God's hand moving through. But if you try to see it while you're doing it and you think, well, if I do this, God will probably do this. And if I do this, God's not going to counteract all your moves because you want him to. God's going to do the thing he wants to do through you, through your obedience. And if you're not obedient, then he can't work through you. The only way he's going to work through you is through your faithful obedience. Ruth is a perfect example of this. The lesson here, I believe we've touched on this a couple times this week, but the one I had here is just because you may not be able to see or feel God in your dark times does not mean he isn't present and active in your life. You could be today in that spot where you're like, well, I just don't see God right now. He's been a little distant from me. And I just don't see how I'm gonna get out of the situation, so I got to do it myself. Again, these are your doubts. These are your own logic trying to get God into your story, into your picture. What God's waiting for you to do is surrender to him, be obedient in faith, and then he can move through you. When you try to do it yourself, he's going to have to take a step back and let you fall flat on your face until you can just humbly surrender and say, Lord, I need your help. I've fallen again. I try to do it on my own. And then he'll pick you back up and he'll take you right to the starting point and say, all right, do it one more time. Go. And then if you don't do it again, guess what? Pick you back up, right? Just like you do with your kids when they're trying to learn to walk, from a crawl to a walk. When the girls were little, we'd do that same thing. They would try to walk 2 or 3 feet, fall. We'd pick them up, put them right in that same spot and see how many steps they could take. God's doing that with you. But if you try to cheat the system and your little baby's holding on to the couch and crawling and they're not really walking. You got to let go of these crutches in your life and depend fully on what you were taught by God. Or, in this case, the little scenario, your parents. Your parents are teaching you how to walk. They're holding your hands. You're walking as a kid. They let go. You may fall, pick back up. God is doing that with us. But when we, again, try to find a crutch, whether it be substance or relationships or material, person, place, thing, anything. And then again, we talked about this last time. You make that your idol and you think, well, I'm good because I got my money. That's your idol. You're depending more on your money than God. That's your idol. Oh, I'm good because I got a good job and my health. God can take that away too. God can just touch that, boom, and say, all right, you have all this, big boy, big girl. All right, do your thing. And now you have to go back crawling to God until he picks you back up, sets you in that place, in that position, and let you walk that thing out again. See, Ruth is on point with this. She has been loving, loyal, and kind. She didn't allow her circumstances to deviate her from the promises of God that she learned. We see that Naomi did. Naomi's circumstance allowed her to stray away from the promises of God. She left covenant people, and we can see that today. I mean, if we can try to put some application to that. Some people leave a really good home church because they think, well, I'm good and I could do this on my own, and they stray away from the covenant community only to find themselves back into that covenant community. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with coming home to Christ, nothing wrong with coming home to a church and being humbled. And if it's a church that's loving, it's going to be okay because we're going to love you and we're going to hug on you and encourage you. And we're going to just keep walking with you. Ruth is getting it. Naomi's catching on. Remember, she was, well, I'm bitter and I left full, now I'm empty, but now something's changing in Naomi. Now she's getting filled again. And not only that, I mean, we see the love that she has for Naomi. When Naomi walks in, she's already got the grain and she's winnowing it herself. The winnow process is when you get these grains, you have to kind of crack the shells and kind of rub it together. You see that when Jesus and his disciples are walking to the fields, they get it, rubbing their hands, they get the grain on the inside. She's doing that. Naomi comes in, she sees 30, 40 pounds of grain. She's like, where did you get this? And that's where the whole hope begins to unfold. But not only that, remember, she was eating with Boaz, and then she took those leftovers home. So even in the midst of all this, she's hanging out with Boaz and the reapers. And then, she's not pigging out. I'm pretty sure she's hungry, but she's eating, she's taking her time, and then she puts some back for her mother-in-law. She's thinking about her mother-in-law through this whole thing. She's doing this for her mother-in-law. She's not doing it for her own benefit. Yeah, she's going to benefit off of it, but she's doing it ultimately to take care of Naomi and herself. And so again, she opens up her little satchel and begins to give Naomi the leftovers from her lunch. Again, I really love this story. It's going to get a little, I like the next one, get a little better in the next episode. But with this, they are now continuing to grow in hope because of one man, Boaz. And we are here today because of hope in one man, Jesus Christ. You see, we may have been in a position where we were just stuck and didn't have a place to go, whatever your situation is. And then someone introduces you to Jesus the Christ, the great Redeemer. And then when that interaction happens, your whole life changes. And then you go back and you tell someone else, man, I went to church today and they were talking about Jesus. And then, well, Jesus, someone may know Jesus and start to share that same love. If not, then that's your chance to share the gospel with someone. You can talk about, hey, I went to church and we're talking about Jesus, and they talked about it in a way that I really understood it. And you're so excited and fruitful of what you learn, you begin to spill out to them, and then seeds are planted. And this is just how church works. This is how community works. This is how the gospel works. And with that, we know that there's going to be hope. This story is starting to take a turn. The nights were dark, the situation is dark, but now we see a little bit of hope at the end of this story. We know that Boaz is going to be working. We know that now they're being taken care of. Through their consistency and through their faithfulness to God, God blesses them. And one thing I want to end on, I just kind of jotted down. If I could find it, here we go. Ruth chesed, that's that word, loving, loyal kindness, and service to her mother-in-law, and decision to take refuge under the Lord's provisions had brought blessing on her own head, and Ruth's chesed commitment to God was blessed by the Father's grace and provision. Because of her again, faithfulness, because of her obedience, she was blessed. With that, the lesson is yours. We're going to do our reflection, and then I'm going to share a little story, and then we'll get into comments and questions. Reflection. Have you ever experienced God's providence in a hopeless situation where you meet the right person at the right place at the right time and the right circumstance, where maybe you were stuck on the side of the road, or you're just in a situation where that could have only been God? That was the right place, right person, right circumstance, right everything. Have you ever been in a position? If not, think about it. And don't just leave it up to chance, because again, there's no coincidences. If God's active in your life, He's doing things for your benefit and for His glory. Second one, does God's characteristics shine through you as it did Boaz, displaying faith, grace, and loving kindness? Boaz, when he comes up on his people, hey, may the Lord God bless you. Does that shine through you? Does the love of Christ shine through you to strangers, to foreigners? I know, especially today and all over the news, we hear about immigrants and foreigners, and some people will take it as a bad connotation, like, that's not cool. But as a church, we can't take that same stance. We got to love. I'm not saying to love criminals and things like that, but we have to love our fellow human being enough to share the gospel with them. It doesn't matter if they're foreigners, strangers, outside of the covenant, even in a different religion. People need to hear the gospel. There's a thing I seen just this past weekend where someone's going to Israel and they're sharing, hey, is this Old Testament or New Testament? They're reading out of the Old Testament and they're reading Isaiah 53. And every time they read it, they're like, oh, that's New Testament. That's talking about y'all's Jesus. Because they have no clue. They'd have no clue because no one's been sent. And no one's been sent because we're probably just sitting here, well, somebody else will go. It's up to us to get that gospel to them. Even if we have to smuggle Bibles into a place, that's what we do. That's how we love people. Third one, do you have a relationship with the great Redeemer, Jesus, Son of David? If you've heard about Jesus and you know about Jesus and you believe in Jesus, have you established that relationship with Him? I'm not talking about just knowing the story. I'm talking about really knowing this man and letting Him in and change your life, letting His teaching seep into your heart and then begin to act out on that. That's what obedience is. When you find these nuggets of truth in the Word of God and His teachings? Do you just look at it like, oh, that's a good saying? I'm going to put that on Facebook, or I'm going to put that on TikTok or whatever, and you don't act on it, then you're fooling yourselves. You have to act on these things. So again, do you have a relationship with the great Redeemer, Jesus Christ? If not, I implore you, I encourage you to just open your books, open the Bible, and begin to know, who is this man? And why the fuss? What happened? If you don't know him, if you do know him and you haven't made that commitment, please give your life to Christ. And with that, the lesson is yours, and we'll open up for comments and questions.